Гост ми е мистер Лари Джонсън, бивш анализатор в ЦРУ и служител на бюрото за тероризъм в Държавния департамент на Съединените щати.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. How are you? Where are you? On the East Coast?
I'm well. I'm sitting in Florida, just south of Tampa, Florida.
Why do you call the U.S. a banana republic?
Well, so during the 1950s, when the aftermath of World War II, when the CIA was becoming quite active in overthrowing other governments, there were these banana companies then based in Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica. United Brands is one example. And they were very powerful. Because they controlled basically the economy of those countries at the time. So to refer to a country as a banana republic was to describe a country that's not based on law, that country that is based on favoritism, who you know. Are you properly connected with the right people? It's not based on merit. It's based really on who you are and who you know. And so to call the United States a banana republic now is to admit that the United States political system is corrupted.
80s, 90s?
I think the trend started in the 90s. There were we had a facade before that, but the transformation that has taken place in Washington really accelerated in the 1990s. When I first moved to Washington, D.C. in 1979, I'll describe it as somewhat of a sleepy town. I mean, there were not major buildings. There weren't these high rises being built. It was sort of the city that existed in the 1940s was still sort of there, and then 40 years later. But that's not the case today. In the last 45 years, what we've seen is the growth. You now got luxury automobile makers, Lamborghini, Jaguar, Ferrari. Back when I first started there, you're lucky to find a Mercedes dealer. That was considered upscale. Yeah, Mercedes is now just sort of run of the mill because you got some really expensive ones. Same with stores. The rival Fifth Avenue up in New York City. So this transformation of Washington, D.C. into a place where money buys influence. The growth of the lobbying industry, particularly in the defense industry, took off. And the corruption of the political parties with money has really taken hold. I'm not suggesting that didn't happen before, but now it's happening on a scale that's so massive, so big, that it's overwhelming. And just the physical growth of that area and the amount of money flowing in there, it's unbelievable. So, yeah, I think this corruption really has started in the 1990s and has accelerated through the last 2 decades. Yeah, hey, well, we like to, we say jokingly, we've got the best government money can buy.
Yeah,
because
we do.
You can buy it, and they'll do what you want.
Yeah. Who is guilty for this situation?
There's nobody, one person in charge. It's just it is it's like a parasitic system, and so it's like a human body that's been invaded by a parasite.
Who is the parasite? Who? Names, maybe.
I would say primarily the defense industry. With what's known as the military-industrial complex, because they built the system it's very much a symbiotic system. The lobbyists line up members of Congress who need money. The representatives of those military-industrial contractors will go to lunches and dinners hosted by the lobbyists and pass off a big check that goes into the bank account of the member of Congress. And that member of Congress now is obligated in some form or fashion to that corporation if they ever want to get reelected and get more money. And so when appropriations bills come before the House and that they need votes, the military industrial corporations know who to go to. And those members of Congress who've been paid will approve bills that send money back to those corporations. So it's really, it's a circle.
Certainly.
And each one feeds the other, and it's mutually beneficial. I can't emphasize, though, the amount of money that is really lubricating this whole process. It's the Biden administration policies are self-destructive to the United States. They're not thinking long-term and strategically. They're thinking short-term and tactically. And what I mean by that, they're thinking only in terms of what do we need to do to get more money to these military industrialists? What do we need to do that's going to make us look good potentially among the voters here in the United States, without asking the more fundamental question, are the policies that we're promoting and pursuing going to make the United States safer and more secure and more prosperous? And the answers there are no. So what we're seeing is, but it's not, again, it's not just Biden. The policy in Ukraine is going with the full backing of the Republicans too. So the United States is possessed of a war fever. We've suddenly come to the belief that the only way to solve problems in the world is to go to war, or launch a color revolution, or impose sanctions, economic and political. It's really perverse.
You say in your article, Biden is a problem. There are three scenarios. Could you explain them to our viewers? Which scenario is best according to you?
Yeah, well, the normal narrative in the West is that if we just get rid of Vladimir Putin, all problems will be solved, implying that Vladimir Putin is the problem with respect to Ukraine. But, the history and the facts tell a different story. Vladimir Putin approached Joe Biden with a very specific request in December of 2021, specifically asking not to base any nuclear weapons on territory adjacent to Russia's border, and to not allow Ukraine to become part of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, Biden reportedly agreed to that. Putin breathed a sigh of relief, but then subsequently learned that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said, no way, none of that's acceptable. We're going to do what we want to do. Hence the start of the special military operation. This was provoked by the West, provoked by Joe Biden and his failure to lead and to properly engage the Russians. But, this has been a long time coming. Russia's been seeking an accommodation with the West since, the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of Boris Yeltsin. And then with the rise of Vladimir Putin, Putin asked George W. Bush and James Baker in the early days of the administration, hey, can we join NATO? And they were rebuffed, said no. So this pattern of rejecting peaceful overtures by Russia. Who was it that walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty agreement? The United States. Who was it that abrogated the International Nuclear Forces Agreement, the INF treaty? The United States. So, time after time, we've seen Russia willing to work within the boundaries of international law. And the United States, most recently, Joe Biden, walking outside of that and trashing and destroying such agreements.
Okay, but let's predict the future. You have three scenarios in this article. What will happen?
Well, the most likely outcome right now, with respect to Ukraine, is Ukraine's going to be completely defeated. They'll be forced into an unconditional surrender with Russia. And Russia will take control of Kiev and Odessa. This will be accompanied by a fracturing of NATO. NATO will be no longer the unified force that it is portrayed as it is portrayed today. The United States' position in the world is going to be eroded significantly. We're going to see the rise of BRICS as a significant economic power that will supplant the United States and the Europeans and open a world that really hasn't been open to the global South and to other countries in Europe. I think you're going to find that a lot of people are tired of being bullied and bossed around by Washington and London. So, that's the most likely scenario. I can sketch out other scenarios that don't come out that way, but I frankly don't see them as likely. Russia's not going to lose this war. And the United States is not suddenly going to acquire great industrial capabilities that will allow it to produce as many weapons as it wants. That's not going to happen. So the world's going to wake up and realize, I don't know if you're familiar with the story about the elephant, the large killer elephant bull, but it was being held because it just had a slight rope around its ankle. And one of the tourists that saw this asked the animal trainer, "Aren't you afraid he'll break loose?" And the animal trainer said no, because he's been conditioned to believe that rope was a chain.
Uh-huh.
And from when the elephant was a baby, they did put a chain on it, and the elephant learned quickly if he had something tied to his leg, he couldn't get away.
Mm-hmm.
So he stayed trapped. Now that he's big, just tying a rope around his leg, he could break free of that, but he is conditioned to believe that he's trapped. Up until about 2.5 years ago, Russia was like that big elephant, trapped. It was tied to a belief that it had no alternative but to be part of this international rules-based order that's controlled by the United States, and that it had to be subservient to it. It had to be obedient. Then we come up with the growing threat of the United States to bring Ukraine into NATO and to prepare an attack on the Donbass. And Russia said, okay, enough. No. And they broke free of the rope. And now they're discovering, hey, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm allied with China. Together, we're with India as well. We've got, between India, China, and Russia, out of the top 4 economies in the world as measured by gross domestic product, purchasing power parity, those 3, they represent 3 of the 4 countries in the top. The only other one at the top is the United States. Russia has beat out Germany. Russia's beat out Japan. And so what we're seeing is the emergence of a very powerful economic order that is the United States is not going to be able to control. They'll try, but they won't be able to.
And this will be a very big problem for America.
Yes.
Like for the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
But we don't understand what happened in America. Where is the freedom of speech in America?
Right. No, listen, United States has lost. We talked about it at the outset of this interview. A banana republic.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's doing. It is ignoring the Constitution. The release finally of Julian Assange came at the expense of Assange having to admit he was engaged in conspiracy under the Espionage Act. Well, that's a lie. He wasn't engaged in a conspiracy. He was doing the work of a journalist. So the Biden administration has succeeded in criminalizing the work of a journalist. But they've been cracking down on journalists all along anyway, regardless of what happened to Assange. The critical thing to have a successful government. I believe in what's called a constitutional republic, is an independent and free press, a press that's free to attack the government authorities and raise uncomfortable questions that the establishment would rather ignore. This is why it's critical to have a free press in every society, one that's independent of financial interests and oligarchs.
I quote your title of your article. Putin has been a problem for 40 years. No, it's Joe Biden.
Biden's policies of allowing open immigration into the United States, where the United States is being flooded with illegal migrants from countries around the world, and then his continued support and escalation for the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel and Palestine, as well as the belligerent talk about going to war with China, he's completely overstretched U.S. resources, number one. The most common question I hear is, who's in charge?
Yeah,
who's making the decisions? And I tell you, Americans are as puzzled by that question as are the Bulgarians. Guarantee you, we're not.
You don't know.
We're wondering the same thing. We speculate that it's Jake Sullivan, who heads up the National Security Council. Biden's chief of staff is the real power behind the throne. And then Antony Blinken over at state. Those three are probably had the most influential voices in the Biden administration.
What's the condition of Biden?
Oh, yeah, he's got early dementia. It is undeniable, and I think people, other foreign leaders, they see it and they know that, Biden's not fully functioning. He's not really in charge. He's being led around and told to do this, told to do that, read off of this card, read off of that paper, and he does it. But he's not directing.
Do you remember Brezhnev? You remember Brezhnev? Yeah, Brezhnev was a little bit the man.
Yeah. Well, even Ronald Reagan was in early stages of Alzheimer's disease when he was president. I know for a fact from friends of mine who were involved with briefing him and meetings with him at the time that he could come out in public and put on a pretty good show, but in private, when it came time to work, he struggled.
We are very afraid here on the Balkans, in Europe, because we think that he was provoking Putin to attack Europe. I have in mind Sevastopol and Dagestan this week. Is the USA provoking Putin to attack Europe? And why? Because of money, because of weapons. I cannot understand.
Yeah, no, they definitely look. The West's objective with respect to Russia is to break Russia up, to consume it, to take its natural resources, to take all the gold, the oil, the gas, the uranium, the aluminum, the nickel.
This is Russian point of view, Russian spies point of view. You understand that if I say here in our media here, they will say Martin is a spy, Russian spy.
Yeah, that's when they refuse to address the facts. They have to go for the personal smear.
Yeah,
and it is, what we're seeing is the West is just obsessed with Russia and prepared to destroy it. So the Russians are fighting back. And now, Putin has no intention to invade Europe. I mean, that's a Western fabrication. But the West has every intent on trying to invade and destroy Russia, if given the chance.